the Ski Museum of Maine presents From Tree to Ski. Ski making at the Paris Manufacturing Company in the 1930s. In 1862, Henry Franklin Morton and his wife began a sled-making business in their home in West Sumner, Maine. This venture grew to become the Paris Manufacturing Company and went on to become a leader in building children's sleds. In the next 110 years, this local manufacturing company would go on to build a multitude of wooden designs, including furniture, ladders, wheelbarrows, and eventually skis. In the 1890s, Finnish immigrants started settling in the Oxford Hills, and while skiing was simply a mode of transportation for these brand new Maine residents, others were starting to see skiing as a sport. Around the turn of the century, the Paris Manufacturing Company, inspired by local Finns who used skis to get to work, took advantage of the burgeoning popularity of the sport and began to mass-produce wooden skis. By the 1930s, there were a half-dozen Maine companies making skis, many of these operations in and around the Norway-South Paris area. Paris Manufacturing Company was by far the largest and longest-lasting manufacturer of skis in Maine. In the mid-1930s, Clarence Morton, who was the youngest son of Henry Franklin Morton, shot this 16mm footage of the ski-making process at the Paris Manufacturing Company in their South Paris plant. This film was handed down through the Morton family and finally acquired by the Ski Museum of Maine. Here's a look at the process of ski making at the Paris Manufacturing plant in the 1930s. Paris Manufacturing had a sawmill in the town of Crystal, New Hampshire. Freshly harvested maple and birch were rough sawn at this facility and then sent south by rail on the Grand Trunk Railroad, which conveniently passed right by Paris Manufacturing's plant in South Paris. Here, we see preliminary sawing as the hardwood is trimmed into ski-length billets. The billets were then shipped by rail south to the Paris plant in South Paris. In this process, the billet undergoes mortising for the toe strap. While these wooden skis seemed crude by today's standards, the process included multiple steps with a host of craftsmen involved. The next step was initial shaping, which was done both with automated and manual processes. As the billets undergo additional shaping, they start to look more and more like skis. The next step was to soften the wood in a steam chest. This procedure made the wood more pliable so the toe upturn could be formed. Once the wood softened in the steam chest, the tips were placed on a jig. As the wood cooled and dried, the familiar shape of the tip of the skis is retained. This was followed by initial sanding, performed here with a large drum sander. Secondary sanding was done with a smaller sander and included finish shaping of the tip. Here we see initial router work to shape the top of the ski. Router and sanding work continues while the ski gets closer to assuming its final shape. At the time this was filmed, the ridgetop design was becoming popular, and this design represented Paris's higher-end models. This also made for more extensive work with the routers and manual jigs. Final detail work is performed with the handheld routers and sanders before the finish is applied to the skis. The finishing process continues with an application of stain in the spray booth. Overspray is drawn out of the booth through the large vent in the back of the workstation. This process continues until the entire ski is stained evenly. Here, the staining process continues. Once the skis dried, decals were affixed, and the skis were stacked and allowed to dry. Some models had geometric patterns scored onto the top of the ski. This craftsman is doing some finishing touches on the top of the ski. Near the end of the ski-making process, skis are weighed and paired. Final inspection also included making a visual match for the stain and the grain, as well as matching the flex of the ski. This ensured that each ski was paired with another and would perform well in terms of look and feel. Finally, we see the stapling of the footpad onto the ski. During this time, the venerable Kandahar or bear trap binding was becoming quite popular. Many folks were starting to use this model of cable binding, which would remain almost universal for about 30 years. At Paris Manufacturing, they also made the poles. In the mid-1930s, skis were sold as a package, with the poles included. This multi-step process of pole manufacturing involved workmanship with leather, wood, and some metal. These finished poles are ready for distribution. Finally, the skis are ready for shipping. In this scene, multiple pairs are being wrapped and prepared for shipment to retailers across the region. Here's the finished result: beautifully crafted wooden skis. At the time that this film was shot, skiing was becoming a popular pastime. But in this time before the very large resorts, skiers were flocking to the smaller hills, dotting the towns throughout the state. Here, Eleanor Wood skis the slopes at Douglas Mountain in Sebago. In the time period this film was shot, snow trains and winter carnivals were very popular. Clarence Morton included this footage of a snow train, most likely running from Portland to the Freiburg or Conway station via Maine Central's Mountain Division. About 10 years after this film was shot, ski design changed, and laminated southern hickory became popular. Over the first 50 or so years of the Paris ski, designs did change, but the one-piece billet construction remained constant. Here's a comparison of very early Paris skis and a much newer model. In the late 1960s, after a run of nearly 70 years, the Paris Manufacturing Company exited the ski business.